if we're really thinking about the people and how the impact that cyber has, we need to put the human back into it.
Welcome to another episode of the Man in the Middle podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Malloy. This is an Ithaca Media podcast. In this episode, we're joined by Caitriona Forde, who's a cybersecurity awareness and culture expert with over 20 years in IT and cybersecurity education. And Caitriona is also one of the co-hosts of the excellent West Coast Cyber podcast. So today she's in the guest seat for our podcast, which I'm sure she's enjoying. So founder of her own consultancy called caIT. Caitriona is here to discuss how we can transform cybersecurity training from what's a one-size-fits-all approach to something that's more targeted, tailored, efficient, and impactful. So with that said, I want to welcome you, Caitriona, to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, and I have to admit it feels very nice to be being a guest on a podcast and being interviewed from having to do all the work in the background of preparing the questions. So it's really nice to be able to just rock up and talk about what you love.
Yeah, that's great, because I did want to ask you, like, how does it feel being in the guest set? Because I'm trying to be on my best podcasting performance, because I know, as a fellow podcaster,
no pressure. I'm not judging you.
Yeah. I want to make a good impression. So
we'll have to get you a guest on ours, and then you'll know how it feels.
Fair enough. But look, we at the top of the episode just sort of gave a bit of a brief introduction to your experience there. But what I always love asking our guests when they come on is asking how they got into technology more generally, but specifically around cybersecurity. So if you don't mind sharing that, Caitriona, I'd love to hear how you got into this world of cybersecurity.
Yeah, I suppose it started back when I was at school, and back in Ireland, and where I grew up in Northern Ireland. It was always just a given that you were going to university, and it didn't matter what you're going to do something. And back then we'd done things called A levels, so you'd done 3 A levels, and that determined what university and what course you'd get into. But I had a thought that I would do accountancy. And by the time I'd finished my A levels, I realised accountancy and me were not made to be. So I ended up going and doing computer science, computing and information systems, it was called back then. And I don't even know how I ended up doing it, because we didn't have a computer at home. We had one computer in our school that you were allowed 10 minutes a week on. And here I was going off to university to study computer science. But I absolutely loved it and finished that university honours degree and ended up in an IT managed services company as basically first line of support. Now, first line of support back then was very different to first line of support today. That's 20 odd years ago. We didn't do remote access support. So everything meant you were driving to customers' offices to fix their computers, or you were taking their computer back to the office to fix it. So it looked very different, but I loved it, and I loved the people aspect. I loved being able to get out. I'm a bit of a social butterfly, so I like to be able to get around and talk to people. And that's what I did for 20 odd years. Came to Perth 13 years ago and worked with 2 IT MSPs, enjoyed getting to know the Perth community and businesses. And I suppose really around about 6-7 years ago, I started to see, cybercrime becoming a big issue for the clients that I was looking after. And most of them were in the SME space. And I just had something inside me that I needed to learn more about cybersecurity and what this was to protect businesses and what the threat was. So I went back to ECU and done my master's. And in the process of doing my master's, I'd started my own consultancy. And at the start of my own consultancy, I thought it was going to be more IT consultancy. And that's what I did start doing, more consulting in the IT space. But quickly got pulled into the cybersecurity space, and I got an opportunity to work with one of our large critical infrastructures here to design a cyber education and awareness program, which was probably about 4 years ago. And that just opened my whole eyes to this whole education and awareness piece. and I've loved it ever since. That's what I've been doing since, and I fully love that I now get to help people. I still use my technical skills all the time, and I think that's the beauty of the journey that I've been on, is that I have the technical background, I have the technical understanding. I can go in and talk to technical teams, and I can help those technical teams translate that language to the rest of the business and get everybody on board and a part of what we're trying to do to keep the organization safe. So yeah, I never thought that I would be in a non-technical role, to be quite honest, because I love tech. I love everything to do with tech. My brain still operates very technical. But when I look back through my whole history of my career, it's always been about enabling people to use technology better. And that's even in the IT space. I was more people person than technical. And I always love going around to offices and showing people how to do things simpler and easily, and helping them understand the challenges that they had. So when I look back in hindsight, I'm not surprised I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you've fallen in like a really, really nice area where you still get to use that technical knowledge that you have, but merging it with that passion for people and having that like human centric sort of approach. That's really wonderful.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you, because like you touched on, you know, your more recent career being in the the training and cyber awareness space. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons we initially reached out to you was because you have an upcoming talk around this topic at CyberCon this month, which is literally titled "Transforming Cyber." Transforming cybersecurity awareness training from one size fits all to targeted efficiency. So, could you tell us a bit about what this topic is from the outset, and give us some of like your main points around um, this topic, Caitriona?
Yeah. This topic has been burning inside of me since probably I started in the awareness space. And purely like when you start anything new, and back, 4 or 5 years ago, cyber awareness is not what it is now. And being new to the industry, you relied very heavily on your partners and your vendors for advice and support and guidance on doing things better. And very early on in my career in the cyber awareness space, I took vendor advice that went extremely wrong, and I ran a what you would call a survey to understand the security posture of an organization, and I got some of the worst feedback that I've ever had in my career. I'm going to share at CyberCon that feedback. But again, it was one of those moments in my career where it stopped me in my tracks, going, "How have I got this horrendously wrong? Why have I got this feedback? What have I done?" And it really hit me hard, to be honest. And I was starting to think, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I don't understand the industry. But I was very fortunate at that time that I reached out to the vendors network, and I got to be able to collaborate with people in this space that have been in the culture space for decades longer than me. And it opened my eyes to, that cookie cutter approach. It doesn't necessarily work. And that's what I have basically, spent the last 4 or 5 years of my career, is going into organizations and understanding that organization and designing a program around them. So this is the topic that I'm going to talk about at CyberCon is my lived experience, how following a cookie cutter approach um was just went horribly wrong for me, and potentially could have made me not continue on in this industry, because I didn't understand the people. I didn't understand where they were at. I didn't understand what I was doing. The survey used language that they didn't resonate. It was just, once you see the feedback, you can understand how it stopped me in my tracks. So that's where this has come from. And it's something that I've now, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been very fortunate to work with some fantastic organizations in Perth and Australia, helping them with their cyber program and cyber awareness program. And generally what's happening and has happened in the last number of years is that organizations know that they need to do something with the awareness and the education piece. It's either coming up in a audit, it's even maybe part of a framework that they're following, and then they get sold a platform, and they feel that this platform fixes that awareness problem for them, and that can mean that they do simulated phishing and they do e-learning. And then generally, if it's not rolled out properly, they get backlash from the organization and from their people. And that's where they then find somebody like me to come in and help them fix it. So that's what I've been seeing, and this is where this is all sort of come from the lived experience over the last few years.
Yeah, so it actually sounds like that it's, born out of a situation that was, not just career defining for you, but we could even say life defining, because imagine where you'd be now if it wasn't for that situation that changed the way you looked at things. I guess how did you actually arrive at that? I'm really fascinated in the sense of you were saying that you could have potentially given it up just based on this scenario. So what was it that made you not give up? I suppose how were you able to turn it around? Is I guess what I'm asking.
Well, I deeply felt for the people that were given this feedback, and being a people person, I deeply felt that I had the opportunity here to do things, and make a change in the organization. And instead, I actually really hindered and had quite a nasty impact on the cybersecurity culture, should I say, because I followed vendors' advice. And to me, it was a reflection then on the cybersecurity team as a whole, because the end user and the people within the organization, they didn't know that it was just me and my team that had run this survey. It was a reflection on the whole of the cybersecurity team. So I felt I had a duty to the rest of the cybersecurity team to say, no, we can do better. Let's use this as a learning experience. Why are we receiving this feedback? What is it that we can do to do better? And that's what's really motivated me now, is looking at individuals in organizations and whatever it is that we're doing from an activity perspective, how are they receiving that and how are they perceiving that? And for somebody to write such strong feedback that I received, one in particular was so strongly worded, to me that really moved them in a way that they needed to provide that feedback. And to me, I just put myself in their position thinking, what are they sitting thinking about the cybersecurity team when they felt that they needed to give that? So I suppose it was a motivation. I'm a very driven person to always look at things, and I'm a bit of an investigator. It's probably the reason why I'm going down the PhD route. I don't take things for face value, and I always ask questions and see how we can do better. And I've never been one to follow the pack either. I sort of lead my own way, and I suppose that's what it was. I wanted to understand, how did I get this horribly wrong, and how can I suppose rebuild the reputation of the cybersecurity team, because I was working with an awesome team at that time, and I knew it wasn't a reflection on what they'd done. And in actual fact, when we got the security research team in to deep dive into the data, what they had actually unpacked was that the feedback, yes, the survey had sort of opened Pandora's box and given the organization an opportunity to give feedback that they hadn't had for a while. But it wasn't just about the cyber team. It was a knock-on effect of all the different trainings and all the different communications and all the surveys that the staff had been asked to do. But this had sort of been the straw that broke the camel's back, because we were using American terms in the survey. There was American spelling, and this was just this particular survey had just got them to the point where they're like, no, we can't take no more. So and that's, I suppose that's what hit me, was okay, let's see how we can do better.
Yeah, no, excellent. And you were touching on it, we're beginning to touch on it a little earlier around some of the limitations of having that one size fits all approach. Could you expand a little more on that, as far as what those limitations are as far as that approach?
Yeah. Look, for me, if you do a one size fits all, the first thing that you're not doing is you're not fully understanding the existing culture within the company as it is. And every culture, or every company has its own culture. And, you might say it's the way that we do things around here, how it feels, what the office looks like, whatever it is. But, if you're providing a cookie cutter approach to cyber awareness or education, then you're not understanding the culture, and you're also then, you're not, I suppose, aligning your program with the existing culture. And to me, that's first of all, that's the big thing, because every organization and those staff have different constraints. They have also different risks. So what one organization faces as a cybersecurity risk, another one doesn't. And if your training is just cookie cutter, then you're missing maybe the potential risks that they actually do face. And you might, be, if you think of cookie cutter approach to training, it could be just running simulated phishing campaigns and e-learning. And it could be that you're just training people on the basics, which is multi-factor authentication, your password management, all these generic things, and that we see in the cookie cutter models. But then you're not maybe looking at a particular organization, for instance. Maybe they've gone through a round of redundancies, and their culture is a little bit exposed because of it. And they may be at more potential of an insider threat, or disgruntled employees. And if your training is just giving cookie cutter, then you're not looking at what's happening in the organization at that time that you need to align your training with. Another key example is one of the local councils that I've been working with for the last 3 years now. They now, there's a new legislation coming out in Western Australia called PRIS, and it's around data security and data breaches, and it's for local government and public entities. And they need to train their people on what that means for them, and that's part of their awareness journey. So that's what this year's focus has been building up everybody, so that when the PRIS comes into place, that it's not a massive shock. It's been part of their awareness and their training, and they're already socialized with that this is coming, what it means, why it's important, and the terminology is already part of their knowledge. So to me, if you're just offering cookie cutter training, you're missing all these other elements that are vitally important.
Yeah, so like there's a lot of blind spots for you as far as like what's available to actually be effective from like an awareness and education piece, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's also I look at organizations when I go in. The first thing that I always do when I work with a new organization is I spend time understanding the organization, what they've done previously, and I spend time going round. I even sometimes embed myself in the team, where I sit in the office for maybe 1 day or 2 days a week for a period of time to understand how the business actually operates. Then you get to hear the discussions in the lunchroom. You get to hear the discussions in the corridor. You get to understand how the organization actually works. And when you do that, you can understand what they actually think about the cybersecurity team. What's their experience been with, the training that they've already received? Does the cybersecurity or the IT team, are they the department of no? And everybody thinks that they're just the department of no, and everything they ask for is just no. Or do they feel that they're just sending out simulated phishing campaigns to catch us out, and they don't really understand why we're doing it? And you won't find that out until you embed yourself within an organization, because generally what I find is what the IT and cybersecurity team's perception is completely different to what the rest of the organization are saying. And to me, you cannot do that with cookie cutter. You won't know what they think of the cybersecurity team. You won't know if people are afraid to speak up and report incidents and talk about something that looks suspicious, or get the cyber security team involved in projects at the start. You won't know if that's a problem if you're just offering a cookie cutter approach.
Yeah, and like you're beginning to get to what I wanted to ask, which was like, what does that sort of tailored approach look like? It sounds like, at least from the like information gathering stage, it's really critical to be, inserting yourself and embedding yourself like you're a part of the team in order to get that
Yeah.
understanding. But where does it sort of go from there, Caitriona? Like as far as building that out to be tailored and
Yeah.
customized towards a company or organization?
Yeah. And again, there's not a one approach to this either, because again, it depends on
Sure.
the maturity of the organization, what their priorities are. And obviously budget can sometimes be a big factor, because sometimes companies don't have set aside budget for their awareness training. So all those things come into play when you're designing a program. But for me, it's looking at, for instance, what's already working. And, the main teams that I work with when I first engage with an organization, it's not actually the cybersecurity team. It's the marketing team. It's the communications team. It's your HR and your people and culture, because they actually know what is working in that organization, how people like to receive training, and what's going to motivate people for change. And so that might then define what your program looks like. So, for instance, if you're working with, say, a construction industry or a mining industry, and generally most, a lot of their staff might do toolbox talks or huddles, or can you back onto those? Can you have a small bit of time with those people? You might work in an industry where they're motivated by a morning or afternoon tea. Food is a big motivator for some people, and you say, okay, let's put on a little bit of a morning tea and get people to come and engage. You might know within an organization that there's a competitive edge. They like to compete against one another. So running gamifications and fun activities that people want to know about. And that's one of the most successful things that I have come up with in my career, was a cyber ninja challenge. And I do it in most of the organizations that I work with now. And it's where you self-select to be part of a phishing campaign. And the phishing campaign runs for over 4 weeks. And over that 4 weeks, we will send you out all variety of different levels of complexity of phishing emails. And if you identify them all, then you have a chance of winning some Lego. And it's normally a ninja Lego. And some of the organizations that I've run it in, one in particular, one department didn't hear about it. And the head of the department came to me and said, you're going to have to run that again, because my team are really upset that they couldn't win this Lego. So, those are the types of things that you need to understand from your awareness program. What is going to motivate them for change? The other thing, I touched on earlier, is this department of no, and what's the perception of the IT and cyber teams. And I've spent 20 years in IT. I call myself a technical geek too, so I get this. Sometimes unbeknownst to ourselves, we're so deep in the technical and fixing the technical side that we don't understand, or sometimes don't relate, that our people don't get it, and therefore they then view us in a different light, and maybe they're afraid to come to talk to us because we seem too technical, and they don't want to come across seeming like they're stupid or they don't know what they're talking about. So for me, one of the things that I love doing is socializing the cyber and the IT teams with the rest of the business. Make them accessible, make people say that we're just humans, and yes, we sit beside a computer, and yes, we're geeky and we're technical, but at the end of the day, we want you to come and talk to us, and we want to understand what your challenges and your problems are.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Like, and also, one thing I'm getting from amongst all of that is you're also empowering as many people within an organization to be a part of this program overall and in the long term as well. So it's not necessarily just like a top down approach. It's like everyone
No.
at every level can really be involved in it and feel empowered as well. But one thing I want to ask Caitriona is implementing something like this. How do you go about sort of measuring the effectiveness of a program like this when it comes to awareness and
Yeah.
training?
Yeah, that's a really good question because, I get challenged on this area of metrics quite a lot because obviously in the industry for a long time we focused on things like the click rate in simulated phishing campaigns and the report rate and things like that. And I really disagree that that is a metric for success. I believe that any simulated phishing campaign can be created in a way that will make everybody click. And if you are crafted at that skill, I've seen it time and time again. I've caught many cybersecurity professionals. A few weeks ago, I caught an IT manager with a simulated phish. So I'm a big advocate that simulated phishing campaigns, they're necessary, but they're necessary as an education piece, not as a metric for success, or not as a benchmark as to how well your cybersecurity journey is and your cybersecurity posture is. One of the things that I have come across as a metric for success with one of my clients, they're a local council that I spoke about, and it just sort of came by chance. And then I realized that, wow, this actually does prove that what we're doing is working. So they rolled out a report button, and again, it's a button on your emails. Generally most will call it a phish alert button or a phishing report button or whatever. Within most of the organizations that I work with, I insist in getting that renamed to report suspicious email, because I think that's easier for people to go once they're new to the organization. Report suspicious email. That speaks in everybody's language. Everybody knows what suspicious is. But phishing, I say report phishing. Some people might be intimidated and not know what that button's for, so therefore mightn't use it. So that's one of the things that I do. But what I did in one organization was we implemented the button, and then we had automation behind the button. So when people reported the phishing email, they straight away got a notification back to tell them if the phishing email was a clean email, whether it was spam, or whether if it was a legitimate phishing email. Now, we tracked and measured it, and at the start, everybody that was using the button, a lot of people was just reporting clean emails. So they weren't identifying that they were clean. And there was a small amount of spam and not too many real phishing emails. But then we started a full education and campaign around, if in doubt, click the button and you'll find out. And we could see, the usage of the button started to go up over time. And about 6 months in, we analysed the data, and we could see that the number of clean emails being reported had significantly reduced, and the number of real life phishing emails had increased. So people were actually starting to identify, oh yeah, that's a phishing email, I'll report it. Oh no, that's a clean email, that's safe. So that was, to me, an awesome measure of success, because people were only reporting what the phishing emails was. So that's one of the measures of success that I believe is very important. The other measure that I believe is how many people are actually reporting incidents or suspicious activity. Because at the end of the day, is that not what we want? And is that not the reason behind the awareness programs? Yes, we want people to, change their passwords. And, if you're working in an organization, things like multi-factor authentication and, those types of controls should be forced upon you. But what do we want people to do? We want them to, look at a situation and say, something about this just doesn't seem right. Maybe I need to go and have a chat with the cybersecurity team or my IT team and stop them in their tracks. So to me, that's another measure of success. How many people are actually coming and reporting reporting incidents. Another measure for success, and this one can be quite a cultural shift, and it does take time for it to happen. But when you're starting projects, is the rest of the organization coming to the cybersecurity team and saying, we need you part of this project. Can you come in and have a look to make sure that everything that we're doing is secure and there's nothing risky before we start this project? So are the business engaging the cybersecurity team at the start of the project? To me, that's another huge measure for success. So I also, one of the other measures, I'm not a fan of mandatory training. Now, I do understand for compliance, you have to mandate certain training. So like induction modules and stuff like that, get it. I know that we have to do it. But one of the measures for success is if you don't mandate training, but people still turn up or people still do it, one of the organizations that I work with, I have an 80 to 90% completion rate on training that's not mandatory. Now, that's huge because generally, even myself, I don't want to do training that I don't have to do. So if people are wanting to do it and are doing it, that something's working.
Yeah, like what would you attribute that to? Like, is having that level of buy-in is amazing. Like from an organization. Like, has that come from like your persistence with that organization, and then like I guess more people have been attracted to it, or is it a case of like it was the culture there present already, which you just had a really good understanding of when you were able to come in, or sort of a balance of both of those features?
It's definitely a balance of both. I think the existing culture is definitely very important. And if you have a already inclusive and positive culture, it makes my job much easier. But one of the things that I believe has been a massive success is every time we deliver training, whether it be in person or an e-learning module, we include something about their personal lives. So they know that they're going to learn something about how to keep themselves safe at home every time they come to a training session. And that's, it's called with him, what's in it for me. It's a change management term. And that's what I'm a big fan about. To me, if you can help people understand that they're not going to sit through a boring 30-minute workshop, that they're going to learn something that's useful for them in their personal lives. Also, I'm a big fan, and I know I listened to one of your interviews with Craig Forde, and I was smiling when I heard it. Storytelling, to me, that is the key, the absolute key to getting success within security awareness programs. You have to tell stories, make it feel real, but also give people an opportunity to tell their stories. And this year, ScamWatch, their theme was stop a scam, share a story. And that's what I did with some of my organizations. We arranged sessions for people to come and just tell their stories about what happened to them, what scam did they fall for, or what happened to their family, and it makes it inclusive, that everybody feels that they're part of it and it feels real. So storytelling is such an underutilized skill in this space. And I'm very passionate about, using the use of story to make people know that, no, it's not just them, and that these cybersecurity criminals they're targeting individuals, and it's easy to fall for.
Yeah, and do you find that storytelling has a level of accessibility that perhaps other ways of communicating just doesn't have?
Yeah, I even find at board and C-suite levels, they appreciate the real life stories as well. If you can do case studies around, other organizations within their industry and how it's impacted them, and bring them on, the journey of what's happened to them, the impact, how did they recover, and for me, that's how I suppose I look at the success of my career, and the feedback that I get. I just always relate it back to an experience that I've had with an organization or a business, and I suppose that was one of my first introductions into the human factors in cyber. It was before I even left the MSP industry, when one of my clients had a ransomware attack. They had 70 to 80 staff here in Perth, and they were down for 2 weeks, and before we got everything back online again. But the lady that worked on reception, that then discovered it was her that led it into the organization, she ended up extremely stressed and in hospital with it. And the impact on her personally, she ended up leaving that job within 3 months, and it had a traumatic impact on her. And when you tell other people that story, they can put themselves in her shoes. They can put themselves in somebody's shoes that have fallen for these cyber criminals. And I think that's what we need to make, help people feel that it's not just them, and that it can happen to anybody. So I believe storytelling has a place every part of the organization, and I've had some of the best successes getting through to boards by using storytelling. Where it speaks to their level. They understand when you tell a story that's related to another organization, because then they can put themselves in that situation if it was them.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's obviously an area that I have a lot of passion for as well. So glad to hear that validated in that sense. I want to ask around some of the challenges you might have faced though, Caitriona, when it comes to bringing forward like a tailored or customized approach to organizations. Like it, no doubt about the effectiveness, but what have you come up with? Have you come into challenges when you've looked to implement that in the past?
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, yes. um,
Yeah,
the big challenge is mostly around the time that people need to give to attend maybe workshops or in-person training or facilitation or even gamification. That's normally the largest problem that I face. Also, when you're doing that initial investigation, trying to meet with senior people within the organization that's already busy, and sometimes this is just something else that you're adding onto their plate. So it can be very, very challenging. And also, I think if they've had a bad experience, so maybe if they've already gone down the route of doing the cookie cutter approach, and as I said at the start of the interview, a lot of what I'm seeing is that IT and cybersecurity managers know that they need to do something, and with best intentions, they go out and partner with a vendor. And then they run these simulated phishing campaigns and e-learning, and the organizations had a bad experience. So it can be very difficult, showing them that there's a better way of doing it because they haven't seen anything different. Do you know what I mean? So for me to come in and say, look, it's not all about e-learning. Let's try a different approach. It can sometimes it can be difficult to get the buy-in. Because also, if you think about it, especially in the economic climate that we're in, can organizations afford for their staff to give up maybe 2.5 hours in a quarter to attend training? And they may then start to look at the economic side of it, so it's not just the cost of my time or the program, it's also the cost of that employee not being able to do their job but their training. So there's all those types of challenges that you face. I haven't an answer for it. I haven't a solution. Hence, doing the PhD to see how can we do this better. But it to me, it sometimes can come from the top, really does. If the top of the organization appreciates the risk that cyber poses to the organization, generally if you get that buy-in, then it's easier to filter it down. But if it's not, and if it's just the cybersecurity manager or the IT manager, and then we're trying to get buy-in from the board and the exec, it can be sometimes difficult. So generally, if we can, I always try to do some kind of briefing with the board and the exec at the start to help them understand why we need them as part of this. Is pivotal for them. And I recall back early on my career when I was in the critical infrastructure, the first 6 months was really hard, really hard, where you were going and speaking to heads of departments and head of functions, and they were like, we don't have time, our team's too busy, come back to us in a few months. And this is a 4,000 or 5,000 staff organization, and you just were getting your doors closed on you everywhere. And we ran what we call a senior leader briefing. So it was 40 senior leaders, and we got in some industry experts, well-known figures around the industry to do the briefing. It was quite a big briefing. It was a 3-hour briefing, but we did things like a live hacking demo. So we showed them how easy it was to hack into emails, and then how easy it was to do a phishing campaign. So we showed them behind the scenes. And I remember it was like a light bulb had just gone off, where it was the other way around. They were now coming to us and saying, we need you to come and talk to our team. We need you to, run a session for our team, instead of me going and trying to push. So I think getting that senior leader support at the start, extremely pivotal of making the program successful and helping them understand that it's much more than just e-learning, and it's much more than just running some simulated phishing campaigns.
yeah, and because you mentioned how um, some companies and organizations will, not some, all of them will obviously they'll part of it comes into, what they have budgeted for something like this.
Yeah.
And do you find that it's helpful to, I suppose, communicate effectively the downside of not having that awareness and training within the organization from, there's a myriad of risk, but there is a huge financial risk as well with, from different types of attacks that could pose, really big damages to
Yeah.
organizations. So do you find that that's important to make that clear at the, executive level?
Extremely important. A couple of years ago, I done a board briefing for a construction company that's ASX listed, and I literally before the briefing, in my prep time for it, went onto their website and they showed, I think it was 10 or 12 industries that they work with, and I quickly identified those 5 of them that was critical infrastructure. So, in part of my education piece to them, I basically took a screenshot from their website, highlighted the ones that was critical infrastructure, and said to them, "Do you understand about the SOCI Act, the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, and what that means for you now?" One of them was the Department of Defence, and I said to them, "Look, if you lose your contract with the Department of Defence because of an incident, you most likely won't get it back, and the
Mm,
reputation and the brand." And I could see the board sitting there with, their jaws dropped, that nobody had ever highlighted to them about their key clients were part of critical infrastructure that therefore had to comply with SOCI. So, helping the board understand things like that, that to me is key in what we do, and helping them, understand it in their language as well. We have to talk in a risk language. Boards understand risk, where if you relate it back to what that risk is. As part of that briefing, I also remember taking I think it might have been a Deloitte's report or something, but it was the impact of a cyber incident to organisations in Australia. And I think at the time, it was probably 2 years ago, the number one impact was reputational. And, before I put it up, I'd said to the board, "What do you think is the number one impact?" And they'd all said cost, the cost of recovering from an incident. And when they
yeah.
say, I think cost was like 4 or 5 down, but it was the reputational damage was top up to them. Again, that was like, okay, now we get it. We don't want to be the next company that's on the news tonight to say that we've had an incident.
Yeah, yeah. So like, it seems like that's just such a critical factor of communicating that to, to the executive or to the whole company. But what are some of those things that when you before speaking to organizations, Caitriona, that you find are they common, like, sort of misconceptions or misunderstandings around cybersecurity that you're you're seeing at the front end before you start working with organizations?
Yeah, I suppose one of the things, and actually it's just come up recently, the terminology that we use in the industry is very outdated. The term the weakest link, I cringe every time I hear somebody call people the weakest link. And I actually met a awesome guy recently. I think he's the owner of an MSP here in Perth, and we were in a conversation about cybersecurity and awareness, and he just happened to say, "Oh yeah, there's the people that are the weakest link," and I stopped him in his tracks, and I sort of explained to him why we shouldn't use that terminology, and the how that's having a negative impact. And he actually reached out to me today and said, "Thank you for sharing that with me, because you've changed my mindset." And I've worked in the era of IT where I remember, in the IT support desk, people saying things like, the problem is between the computer and the chair, it's the user that's the problem. And these types of things haven't helped our industry. And I think that's one of the things that we need to get wrong, or need to get better at, sorry. And it's one of the things that I struggle, and it's one of the things that I won't work with organizations that have that mindset, that if I don't think I can help change it, if I identify a cybersecurity manager or an IT manager feels, doesn't understand that we need to get people on board, instead of, calling them the risk if they have a negative impact or a negative view. It's something that I feel as an industry we need to stamp out. And so to me, that's one of the things is a big misconception. I think the other big misconception is around the simulated phishing and how that's used. As I said, to me, it's not a metric for success. But I've heard horror stories out there of companies, having, leaderboards of people that have fell for phishing campaigns and putting them up in the cafe or the lunchroom. I've heard other companies putting in policies if they've had they click 3 times on a simulated phish, then they lose their job. And I've heard of people actually getting sacked for, clicking 3 times. To me, that it even related back to road safety. You have an opportunity. If you speed, you have an opportunity to do better. And I think that we need to be careful about how we put these controls in place, that people don't feel that they're not being able to come to work to do their job. Because at the end of the day, we must remember that we're in this for IT and cyber, but generally people within an organization, they're there to do a different job. They're there to be either an engineer, they're there to be part of HR, whatever it is, recruitment, whatever their role is that requires IT to do their role. They didn't get into their career to do IT. And I think sometimes we forget that. And I think we need to have more empathy and more compassion for people and how they use technology. Even think about it yourself. When's the last thing something's gone wrong on your computer and it causes massive frustration? Like recently I done an update on my computer and everything moved. And when I went to open things from my emails, they were opening in a different browser that I was used to, and it's frustrating. So we must have that empathy for people, that technology for general population, it is frustrating. And if we don't enable them to use it to do their job, well, guess what? They will find a way around it to do their job if that's what they need to do.
Yeah, no, I really like that empathy piece because like even myself, I think when I have technology problems, it brings out the worst in me. So yeah, I totally appreciate that. But and I'm glad that you sort of brought up around like really like changing the way down to like the language we use around cybersecurity training and awareness, because it's something that's actually interestingly come up a few times with some other guests I've had on this podcast. And like when you were saying that, it reminded me of that story you were telling before of in like an organization that when it was investigated, it was that woman who ended up letting the attacker in, and just the emotional damage it had to her as well. Like do you feel like that's why it's important to have that empathy and to change the way we're speaking around it? Because not only it sounds like it's counterproductive, number one, but then also like the damage that it could potentially pose to just ordinary people there to do their job for something else that aren't focused on IT and cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I think that's an area that I don't know of too many that has looked at it yet. Funny, I had a really awesome security engineer reach out to me recently to ask did I know if there was any studies done on the psychological impact of an incident on an individual. And I think it's something that we need to start looking at more in depthly, because you imagine that you've gone to work and you're busy doing your job, and hey ho, you've clicked on something and you've caused a massive outage within your organization. You're not going home a happy person. You're going home stressed. Are you going to lose your job? How is it impacting your peers? There's so much psychological and emotional issues with it. And I feel that's something that we don't consider a lot. Sometimes we think about it from an individual perspective, if they've got scammed in their personal life and, that they've, lost money and it's had an impact in their personal life. But I think we forget to look at those within organizations that potentially, they have fallen for these types of scams. And it reminds me of a recent incident within one of my clients. One of their very senior execs received an email, and it looked like a report that she needed. And she said herself she was on site at a mine up on the north, and she said she was really, really busy, but she had like a 15-minute window within her meeting schedule. So she thought she'd get through her emails and clear out her mailbox and smash out her emails. And she said this email came in, and she said it was like a couple of minutes before the next meeting was supposed to start. And it said something like salary report, and she was expecting a salary report. She opened it, and it was a PDF. She opened the PDF, and it was a DocuSign document, but it had the company logo in the DocuSign. So she thought, yeah, this is legit. It asked her to scan a QR code on her phone, which she did, and then she entered her credentials. Now, she said in the back of her mind, she thought something was wrong, but she needed to get to her meeting. So she closed the computer and off she went, or locked her computer and off she went to the meeting. And she said, then when she came out of the meeting, I think the IT team or the security team had the system started to flag that something was up. So obviously they were trying to compromise her account, but they weren't get past the MFA, and they asked her what's happened, and she denied it for 4 hours, and she actually admitted that she tried to cover it up because she said she felt so embarrassed that she'd done this, and that she had fallen for it, and she should have known not to fall for it. And she said, when in hindsight, when she looked back, all the red flags was there, but she was busy. She was trying to get to her next meeting, and she just hadn't the capacity to deal with it, and thankfully she was very brave to allow me to turn that into an education piece. And we then done an interview with her and shared it with the organisation, and she shared what happened and how she felt after it happened and why she tried to cover it up. And in that interview she said, look, I haven't lost my job, I'm still here. So she obviously somewhere subconsciously thought, I could lose my job over this, and that's an awful feeling for anybody to have, because a cyber criminal has targeted you in the role that you're in, and I think this is part of what I do. I'm passionate about changing that we should all be able to speak up no matter what it is. We need to know that that's what the cyber criminals want us to do. They want us to feel guilty, they want us to feel ashamed, and they want us to sit there and not say nothing.
Yeah, brilliant. And again, it comes back to that empathy piece, doesn't it? Like people having an understanding that it could happen to anybody. Like I said, someone who in hindsight saw that there were the red flags there, and the circumstances were such that they didn't seem like red flags at the time. So it's easy to overlook that. Yeah. We are unfortunately getting to the end of this conversation, Caitriona, but I do want to sort of end on like sort of a parting note, and ask you, like, if there was one thing that you could change within organizations when it comes to cybersecurity, what would that be, and why?
To me, it would be to get rid of the cookie cutter training, to not flood people with e-learning. Let's face it, who enjoys e-learning? I don't know of anybody that seriously really does, enjoy doing it. And I think we need to think about, the cognitive load that we're putting on people by giving them more and more and more training. They're not retaining that information. So for me, if we could get organizations to commit to maybe even doing 2 facilitated training sessions, whether it be 20-30 minutes per person per year, to me they would retain that information, and they would change their behaviors and understand security much better than making them do a 30-minute e-learning every month. So for me, that's one of the big changes that I want to see in our industry. I know that it probably is not what the vendors want to hear, because it won't make them as much money, but again, I think if we're really thinking about the people and how the impact that cyber has, we need to put the human back into it. And by doing more e-learning, we're removing that human connection as well that makes people actually stop and listen and learn.
Fantastic, and I totally agree with that sentiment. I think that's a good way forward. Like I said, Caitriona, we are unfortunately at the end of this conversation. And I really appreciate you coming on board to speak with me today. But how can people find out a bit more about your work, and if they wanted to get in touch, how could they do so?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so reach out. I'm always happy to have a chat. Anybody that knows me, always happy to go for a coffee or a drink, or jump on a Teams or a Zoom call. And meet with anybody that wants to have a chat about it. So LinkedIn's probably the best place. I have a website as well, caIT.com.au. I do a lot of stuff through the podcast. So if anybody's interested in West Coast Cyber and the podcast, you can find us there as well. So you'll find me most places over the internet. If you just put my name in, it comes up. So and I just love people reaching out to me. I always have time and stop and have a chat.
Yeah, fantastic. So I recommend people do that. And yeah, I recommend people tune into the West Coast Cyber podcast. You guys cover some really good topics and make it, really accessible and palatable for all listeners. So I think that's great what you guys
Thank
do.
you.
But
Thank
once
you.
again, Caitriona, really appreciate you coming on board today, and
Thanks for
looking
having
forward
me.
to looking forward to seeing you locally. We are in the same city, but also I will see you over at CyberCon. Looking forward to seeing the full presentation of this topic that we spoke about.
Yeah. And if anybody sees me at Cybercom, come and say hello. I'm, be prepared to have a conversation. I love to chat. So I'm really excited to meet so many people that I've met online that I haven't met in person yet. So it's going to be a big week.
Fantastic. I'm sure you're getting all prepped for it. big
I
one.
am.
For
I
sure.
am.
Good stuff. All right. Thanks very much, Caitriona. Appreciate it.
Thank you.